Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Azure Infrastructure Update. It's the 22nd of August, and actually a big collection of updates this week. But first, just wanted to say thank you. I got this kind of pop-up on my little YouTube creator dashboard saying I hit 5 million views, so really do appreciate everyone watching. With that, obviously a lot of work goes into creating all my content, so please like, subscribe, comment and share, hit that bell icon to find out about new stuff. So, new videos this week. Part 2 of my DevOps Masterclass. This was a huge, I think 2.5 hours, really starting from the ground up. And everyone needs to know Git, even if you're not a developer, if I'm just working with scripts or templates or really any kind of artifact. Git is so powerful. So recommend sort of going and learning that. It's an investment of your time, but I really do think it's worth it. And then the new peered VNet address space modify capability, I did a video about it, how it's kind of working under the covers and how you use that. Getting on to the new features. So Azure VMware Solution now has placement policies. Remember, Azure VMware Solution is all about that vSphere-based solution actually running in Microsoft data centers. That's really useful. If I'm a VMware customer, I could take my existing knowledge, my existing tooling, and very easily just move my resources to Azure. Now, this is exposed through these kind of private clouds. Now, a private cloud is made up of clusters. I can have up to 12 clusters per private cloud, and each cluster is made up of 3 or more nodes, up to 16. So what I can do with placement policies is now at that cluster level, there's really 2 different types of placement policy. There's VM to VM. And with the VM to VM, I can either select I want to do an affinity, i.e. keep these VMs close together on the same host, maybe they interact a lot, or I can do an anti-affinity, keep them apart, maybe for resiliency purposes. Then the second time is VM to host. I can say, once again, hey, I want to keep these VMs sort of on the selected host or keep them off of an anti-affinity relationship. HBV1, NC and NV V1 series retirement announced. Now, for the HB, this is retiring not until kind of end of August 2024. But you want to move off of those. There are better versions available, the V2, V3, which basically have better memory bandwidth, better RDMA, faster drives. And then the NC and NV, well, they're retiring end of August next year, 2022. And once again, there are newer V3 SKUs. Again, generally for the performance versus price, they're a better option anyway. If you don't get off of them by the time they're retired, they're going to be deallocated. Azure App Service now has a storage mount capability in GA. So I think about, hey, if I have these Linux-based containers, this could be a built-in container or a custom container, what I can now do is have that Azure storage really available as a local share. Now this could be Azure Files, so I could do read-write. It could be Azure Blob, I just want to read from it. It supports service endpoints, it supports private endpoints, but now I can easily make that content available to my Azure App Service-based environments. Maybe if I had some requirement for persistent storage, maybe I had some artifacts, maybe images or videos I wanted available to those, whatever that is, I can now very easily expose that just like a local share to my Azure App Service. Azure Static Web Apps now have private endpoint support in preview. Remember, the Azure Static Web Apps are designed around, hey, I have this pre-rendered content. I don't have to do any kind of server-side rendering of maybe front pages for some web service. So the Azure Static Web App, I can take that pre-rendered content and actually make it geographically available. It ties into things like Azure Functions very, very easily if I do need to do some additional server-side processing. Well, now I can actually access those using a private endpoint. Remember, a private endpoint is an IP address in my VNet, and that will turn off internet-based access to that. For the Azure Kubernetes service, actually a number of changes. So firstly, the CSI storage driver support has gone GA. So this is the container storage interface. It's a set of drivers that are designed to expose storage services to my services running inside the AKS cluster. The big benefit of these is rather than kind of those various providers and drivers being part of the core Kubernetes kernel, the core software, well, now they're just kind of these add-on components. They can be updated out of cycle, new functionality added far more easily. So now with this, things like Azure Files, Azure Disk Storage is now available as a GA CSI storage driver. But other things can utilize this as well. Things like Azure Key Vault actually has a CSI driver. I think it's in preview right now. But through that, I can interact with secrets in the Key Vault for workloads running in AKS, my pods, just like it was a file system. So this is a very powerful capability. Kubernetes 1.21 support was announced. And also public DNS for private AKS has gone GA. That might seem a little bit confusing, kind of what's the idea of that. So remember, the whole point of kind of a private AKS is, if we think about, ordinarily we have things like kind of the API scheduler. And that API scheduler we interact with. Now, when I have a private AKS cluster, what actually happens is a private endpoint is created in my VNet. And it's through that endpoint I go and talk to the API scheduler, which is obviously part of that far larger AKS control plane. Well, imagine I had other VNets. So kind of a VNet 2, and that's peered. Or maybe even I have some on-premises network that's connected via a site-to-site or express route. Rather than trying to share that IP address, what you can now do is, with this capability, actually map this to a public DNS name. So now they would all be able to resolve via that name to that private endpoint IP. It's still only available through that endpoint, so I'd have to have connectivity to it, but now it can actually go and create that name for me. So for connected networks, be it Azure or other clouds or hybrid, doesn't matter, I can now use this name, which will point to that private endpoint IP address. So that's kind of the idea behind that. Moving on to networking. So there are just some new network insights, really around troubleshooting experience, like private link, NAT gateway, public IPs, and NICs. Has things like the resource health, connected resources, there's pre-built workbooks. I can show it kind of super quickly. So if I jump over here, what we can actually see super quickly is, if I actually go and look, for example, hey, we go and look at monitoring, and we have all of our different insights. Well, I have networks. Well, under this, we now see those different types. We have the NAT gateways, we can see is kind of visible here. We have public IPs visible. You can see all these different resources. You can basically drill down into those various things and get more information about them, see what's going on, just general troubleshooting, health, connectivity, etc. So just expanding the capabilities behind that. So that was that kind of network insight side. Then moving on the storage, so Azure Blob Inventory has gone GA. This is the idea, and I've covered this before. It will basically go and create a file for me, a CSV or Parquet format, daily or weekly, of the content of my storage account. I can do filters around it, and it will just go and create that. If I jump over again super fast, if we go and look at one of these, so if I jump over to a different subscription, look at my storage account, under my kind of data management, you can see we have this blob inventory option over here. And what I do is I create rules. So here I've got a default rule, all blobs, and you can see I can do various different configurations around, well, what am I inventorying? I can do filters around it. There's all various options I have. You can see, hey, blobs or containers, different types I want to capture. Do I want version, snapshot, CSV, Parquet, daily, weekly, all of those options. And I say where. And then basically what that spits out is, if I go to my containers, I have that inventory, and based on year, month, day, etc., I'll have this CSV file that has the content of that particular account. So that's kind of that inventory capability. Azure Archive Storage Events has gone GA. So remember, there's kind of 3 tiers when I think about archive storage. So we think about, yeah, hey, there's kind of the hot tier, the kind of cool tier, and then you have kind of that archive tier. And the whole big deal is the archive tier is essentially offline. So if I want to bring that and access it, I have to rehydrate it. I have to move that back out of archive to cool or hot. Well, that can actually take a fairly significant amount of time. It can actually take up to 15 hours. Now, there is kind of a priority option. Well, in the past, if I was doing that, if I wanted to know when it was finished, I'd have to kind of keep polling and checking, hey, do a hammer poll. Is it done? Is it done? Is it done? Is it done? What it can now do, once that is complete, it can kind of spit out an event. And now what we can do with Event Grid, which is kind of the whole point around this, it will actually go and now fire a handler. So Event Grid is doing the work to kind of look for the events, then it can fire off a handler. So that could be a logic app, it could be an Azure function, which could now go and do something because that rehydrate is actually completed. So that's the nice thing about having this ability to now, hey, have events and integration with Event Grid when that hydration is actually completed. And then Azure Blob Last Access Time is GA. So like my lifecycle rules, my lifecycle management can now not just be actual modifications. I can now make decisions about moving it between those tiers, for example, actually if it was just modified. And they've done some clever stuff. It's only going to write something, I think, once every 24 hours, no matter how many times I actually interact with it. So obviously that would be a transaction. And I can do more from just lifecycle management. I could have my own tools go and query, hey, that it was accessed. But really the lifecycle management, I have kind of this option to now select, hey, modified or accessed. A lot of things on the database side. So for the flexible, Postgres and MySQL, remember flexible is based on virtual machines, not containers. It lets me stop-start. It lets me use burstable VMs. It lets me auto-grow storage, scheduled maintenance, a whole bunch of different things. But those burstable VMs, well, now it will actually expose the metrics for those burstable VMs to me. The CPU credits I've consumed and the CPU credits remaining. Remember, the whole point of burstable is that unlike most of the other SKUs that I actually get, I don't know what is going on today. Most SKUs I get 100% of the CPU. With burstable, remember, what I'm provisioned is maybe kind of 10%. And what happens is, if I'm using less than that, let's say I'm down here, well, I actually start accruing credit. That lets me now burst above my provisioned amount for a period of time, and obviously it would start consuming that credit I've built up. And you actually start with a full bucket of credit as well. So what this now lets me do is actually see those numbers as part of my flexible PostgreSQL or MySQL. Flexible MySQL now has standby zone select in preview. This is the idea that, again, I can have a standby instance with flexible. So it's very fast automatic failover. Well, I can actually now pick the zone I want that standby in. Typically it will be a different zone for resiliency, but maybe for the absolutely lowest latency, I'd put it in the same zone. Also, they announced a bunch of additional regions for the preview for both Postgres and MySQL. And then PostgreSQL hyperscale. So remember, this is based on Citus, where I have kind of that one coordinator node, but we partition out the actual data over lots of worker nodes. That gives us kind of this infinite scale, very high performance. So the basic tier has gone GA. So what I just said about having a coordinator node and then multiple workers, in the basic tier it doesn't. All of that is on one box. But it still distributes the data. So what that gives me is the ability with these distributed tables, if in the future I've kind of done some work, I've done some testing, I want to move to a standard SKU and now have that sharding over actual workers, I'm already in the right format. I can just switch the SKU, take advantage of that, and then pay the additional money for that. Citus 10 is now GA. So again, that's the technology that lets us shard the data over multiple instances. That adds things like columnar compression. That columnar is kind of a big deal. Ordinarily, when I think about a database, we have rows of data. So rows are kind of going that way. And a row could be kind of my name, it could be age, could be hair color, maybe not. But they're all different types, they have different formats of data in there. So what I do with columnar is we actually store it this way. We store it in the columns. And if you think about it, what that does is for certain types of interactions, it's a lot more efficient. Because it's all the same type. If I only care about average age, I'm not now scanning loads of different rows. I'm just going down that one way it's stored. From a compression perspective, when I'm compressing in rows, it's all different types of data. The compression is not that great. If I compress at the columnar, the column, hey, it's all the same type of data. I get very, very good compression. So that whole columnar support is a big deal in terms of that compression and actually making queries more efficient with it. And Postgres 12 and 13 have also now gone GA. These are kind of the database open source engines. That's now in addition to the existing version 11 support. Same region read replicas. So I can actually take an entire hyperscale PostgreSQL and have other instances replicating to them. Normally it's just read access. I can now have a read replica in the same region. Imagine I had some big analytical workload, some analysis I wanted to perform. I don't want to hit the main hyperscale cluster, because that's doing the work. I could have a read replica and do my analysis against that instead. And then scheduled maintenance has gone GA. So there's normally system managed maintenance. It's going to pick a day and it's going to do it between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. the local region time. Scheduled maintenance lets me pick that window. I can pick a 30-minute window and a preferred day of the week, and it will perform the maintenance in there. I still get notifications. I think it's at least a 5-day notification. It's always a 30-day minimum gap between them, but I now have a lot more control. Also, the whole server group restart went GA for hyperscale, where I can restart all of the servers in that group. And also PG Bouncer went GA. This is really just, I talked about it before, which is why I'm not covering it again. It's a connection pooling tool. So my clients now talk to PG Bouncer to accept the connections, and then it more effectively utilizes actual connections to Postgres. And then Cosmos DB, continuous backup point in time restore went GA. So this is this constant backup of my Cosmos DB. And now I, through things like the portal, can perform a very granular restoration of my data from any point in the last 30 days. So that is now GA. Miscellaneous. So the new top secret cloud was announced. I don't think the term top secret means what they think it means, but now we can think about this kind of the Azure commercial cloud that most of us live in. Now, even that commercial cloud is things like FedRAMP High, DoD Impact Level 2. So even if I have certain requirements, I still might be able to actually use just the Azure commercial cloud. Then they had Azure Gov. That was kind of DoD Impact Level 4 and 5. That was also FedRAMP High, but ITAR and iOS 1075 and a bunch of other things. Then it was Azure Government Secret, which was DoD Impact Level 6 and a bunch of other things. Well, now they have Azure Government Top Secret. So that has a bunch of other kind of clearance things. They're all discussed. There's a blog article telling you about the new Top Secret cloud that was announced. Nothing is working for me today. There we go. Everything's a little bit tired. I think it's Friday. Oh, it didn't actually load. Huh. Let's try it one more time. Come on. There we go. We'll get there in the end. So it actually talks about all those different certifications. And we can see, hey, there's this new Azure Government Top Secret and what all of those new kind of capabilities actually are. So we can see that over there. There's a new Azure VM selector. It's just kind of a nice little experience. Let's try and open that as well. It basically just walks you through, you tell it some things. So it's like, hey, I want to find VMs by a work type or by OS, a deployment region. And it asks you, hey, what are my kind of workloads that I'm trying to do? What are the kind of sizes I want? Are there any special features maybe I want about it? And it basically will guide you through and suggest an optimal virtual machine size. Then, next up, Log Analytics Agent retirement was announced. Now, pay attention to this. End of August 2024. You don't panic. I've already had people email me like, oh, AMA, the Azure Monitor Agent, doesn't have parity yet. It doesn't for all things. You have 3 years. So this is not saying get off of the Log Analytics Agent today, but just start thinking about you're going to need to move to the Azure Monitor Agent in the next 3 years. Probably won't leave it to 3 years, but you have a lot of time. By then, Azure Monitor Agent will have way more features and at least be parity. Remember, the Azure Monitor Agent replaces the Log Analytics Agent, the VM Diagnostics extension, the Telegraph for Linux, brings it all in, has the data collection rules. I did a whole YouTube video all about the new Azure Monitor Agent and the data collection rules, so go and check that out. But just letting you know, but don't panic, you've got 3 years. There are new VM SKUs supported by Azure Batch. Remember, Azure Batch is that ability to have jobs submitted, and Azure Batch will worry about actually doing that scheduling for me. So this is very large scale parallel workloads, high performance computing. So they've added support for kind of the new FX series virtual machines, some of the new ND and NP series virtual machines as well. Windows 11 now has preview images actually for Azure Virtual Desktops. This is Windows 11 Enterprise Preview, Windows 11 Multi-Session, which remember multi-session lets me have on a client OS multiple people connecting, which really optimizes my resource, and Windows 11 Enterprise Multi-Session with the Microsoft 365 apps installed. So that's out there if you want to go and play around and try that. And that is it. As always, thank you for watching. And until next week, take care.